So in this tutorial, we are going to focus on the second major part of the Venlearn Editor software, which is the library or study materials section. In earlier tutorials, we have focused on assessments or question explorer section, where we're able to create assessments, add papers, add question groups, and add questions. So the assessment part of the Venlearn Editor helps us create content, essentially for computer-based testing. But that's not the final thing Venlearn does. Venlearn can also help you create library content that students or whoever can practice, learn, access notes, access materials, access questions as well. So I'm going to show you how the study material section works. So in order to start the study material, we click on the second item here. So you can see now that the root node is library, is not called an assessment, because with this part, we're able to create library content. And this library content can be used in the Venlearn software. And then clients or students can access the library content. It could be in the library, it could be at home, or wherever they are. Now, the first thing we can do here is we can create a new subject. By right-clicking, we see an add subject. So currently, there's one subject, mathematics. We can add another subject, say English language. Now, let's start with these two subjects. So the properties still apply, the subject title, description, the topics. So this time now, topics are available at the subject level. So currently there are no topics for English as well as mathematics. Now, hide node will come to it when we're talking about linking to question groups. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to right click, add resources. Now, there's a concept called resources in study material. So resources are predefined nodes. For example, there are two resources, which is the practice question resource and study resource. So if you want to create a library content for practice questions or past question, you can use the practice question resource. If you want to create a library content for notes or for study journals or study manuals, whatever they can study, you can use the study resource. You can actually create a custom resource in case it doesn't apply here. I'll show you how to do that later. So let's add the two major resources, practice question and study. Now, you can also go further. Under a resource, we have two resources currently. We can also right click and add a question group. So this shows that questions can be added under a question group. Or we can add a folder. Folder is just plain old folder, you know. A folder is a container that can contain anything. It can contain a question group, it can contain a question, as the case may be. So before we go and add a new question group, we can talk about the properties we don't know about. So there are two properties here, child reference name and children layout. So child reference name is essentially telling us, for example, if we add a group here, the group can be past question for previous years. So let's say this is 2001/2002. So we can be creating content for our school in the practice question where we are adding the previous question so that new students or students seeking admission can look at the past question. So because we know that the questions are past questions and we are grouping them by year, we can decide that the child reference name here will be called year. So what it means is that anytime we're making reference to the content here, it will be regarded as the years. So you're going to see an example how it is rendered in the output. So let's say we are working with years. The next thing we can do after, so this question group has some similar properties with the question group we had in assessment. For example, we have a question type, it's pretty much the same question type. The number of questions, you can put random number of questions, and the duration as well, which is maybe 2 minutes. So their other properties are similar. So there's also a new property called the log content. You're going to see how the log content applies here later. But every other property is similar to the properties we have in the assessment. So if you are a bit confused, you can go through the tutorials for assessment, the assessment tutorials, the paper tutorials, question and question group tutorials. In those tutorials, we explain each and every one of the properties and how they work. Now, we can decide to add another group. This time it can be 2002, 2003. So in a similar way, we can fill the type of content. So it's pretty much the same thing we have with assessments. So after doing that, it's now time to add questions. So in a similar way, we can add one or many questions. So let's just add 2 questions, just for simplicity. Then for the second year, we'll add as well 2 questions. So you can see how we can create library resource. I'm going to show you how this will be rendered in the client or in the interface. Now, apart from practice questions, so we can now populate the question the same way we populate question in assessment. So that's one. Now let's focus on the study. So study is a unique node that wasn't present in the assessment. So I'll dwell more on this. Now study similarly has the resource title as well as description, and you can click on edit to edit it. Okay, so child reference name still applies. So say for instance, under mathematics, we are going to add mathematics topics. So for example, there's an add topic, there's an add folder, or there's an add content. So if we're adding topics directly, we can change this child reference name to topic. By default, it's folder. But let's say we want to group the topics into different folders. Let's say arts, science, and humanities. In that case, we can leave it as folders, and then we can come and add a new folder and call it arts before we go ahead and add the topic. It really depends on what you want. So you can see that the study materials has a lot of flexibility. It's not strict on what you can do. You can decide to add folder first before topic. You can decide to add topic first. You can decide to add content first. Now let's just go and add a topic. So a topic is similar to the same, is more or less like the same topic we have in assessment. But this time, you are adding it directly under the subject mathematics. So let's create a topic. Let's say the first topic is indices. We add it. So automatically creates a topic for us. And there's now a content area. So you can see the topic title. This is where we'll now type the content, more like the material the person will use. So we can now define indices, give examples of indices, so that when students come and select indices, they can read through just like they read their notes. So there's also other properties like hide node, add practice question, and log content. We'll come to that. So we can add another topic, logarithms. So this is how we add topic. So remember, this is a study material content. So we are adding content for study. Now let's populate the indices. Now, this is another interesting part of this software. It has, so the content field for study materials or for topics is not the same as the content field for assessments. Assessment, you see what you see is what you get editor. You can make it bold, you can italicize it. And so there's a bit of difference here. For the content, we use Notion style block-based editors. If I press slash, you will see some of the items. If you want to type a header, a text, a bullet points, a numbered list, a checkbox, a quote, or a divider, whatever you want to type. You can also upload image, formula, table, HTML, and linked content as well. So for example, I can decide that the first item here will be a header. So we can call this header, we can just repeat its indices. And then we add another item and we can start to define indices. So we can essentially create a formatted content here, just like we can format it in MS Word. The only difference is that it is a block-based editor. And you'll see the reason for that. The reason is so that we're able to sort of create subtopics using the block. So header 1 will appear first. Any content under header 1, like header 2, will be under header 1, then header 3 will be under header 2. So when we're displaying it on the client, I'll show you how it looks like. Now, the other thing is the hide node. So there are sometimes you want to hide node from a user. This is particularly useful if you are linking a note to a practice question. For example, after taking this indices tests, if for some reasons you want the students to be able to practice some question, like after studying on the app or on the client, they will see a practice question button. In order for you to do that, what you need to do is to what? Click add practice question, yes. Now, it will now ask you, select the question group. So this is where you now select the question group you want the practice question to cover for these indices. So in that case, I can come here and select that mass, go to practice question. You see the question group I've been added. So that, let's assume 2001 and 2002 are indices based question, right? You can select it and click link. And now you have linked these particular indices to a question group. On the client app, when the user is seeing it, after studying the indices, they will see a button, practice question somewhere, and then they can now take the test. Now, if we don't want this, you remember we linked it to this. If we don't want this to show in the app because it is already a content we are linking, all we need to do is just to hide it, so users will not see it. So the idea is just we can add our questions anywhere, but we can hide it for them to use, to not to see it. If they are going through practice question, if we hide this node, they'll only be able to see 2002, 2003. I can just call this indices just for clarity. Indices questions. So because we linked the topic indices to indices questions, we don't want the user to access the indices question when they are studying, when they are practicing. So it means that these indices, because we have changed hide node to yes, it will not show. What will only show is this 2003, 2002, 2003, because it is not hidden. So the essence of that is whatever we want to link that is not supposed to be available to users, we can simply hide it. So that's how the hide nodes work. Then the other property is lock content. So one thing I didn't mention is that PrepMate is a popular exam preparatory app for O-level students, people sitting for WAEC and JAMB exams. So it's an app that contains past questions for various years, as well as notes, syllabus, and all they need to pass their UTME exam. And PrepMate is a service that they have to pay to unlock all the features. So this is the exact software we use to build PrepMate. 100% of PrepMate's content was designed with Venlearn Editor. So there are some contents that are locked. There are some contents that are open. So the way we lock content in PrepMate is to use the lock content property. So for example, for study materials, the first two topics are free. So we don't lock the first two topics, but subsequent topics are locked. So that's how we simulate it. So if you want to create an application like PrepMate, you can actually use the Venlearn editor to do that. So that's how, so I've been able to explain the hide node. I've been able to explain the lock contents and then the add practice question. So we'll proceed. In a similar way, we can add content for logarithm. So we can add a header. Sorry. So we can say logarithm. So at the same way, we can just populate the body. So essentially, I will show you a perfect example that we have populated already, so that you see. I don't have time to start, filling all this data. So the properties are still applied. So there are also other properties. Add folder. Let's say, for instance, there's another folder for quadratic equation. So we can right-click and click on Add folder. Right? So the folder can be called, let's say, other topics. So folder is just a container for anything. So since we are talking about what will be contained in the folder is other topic, we can call the child reference name topic. And so we can now add the other topics. So we can create a topic, or we can add another folder. So we can nest folders infinitely, however we want. Okay, so there's also content. A content is similar to a topic, but a content is not a topic. So a content is just whatever we want to give to them that is not a topic. Because mind you, all these two topics we have created are already available under mass. If you go to mass now and go to edit, you see the two topics there. But if we add it as a content, they will not be there. So content are similar fields like this because you populate content, but they are not added as topics. For example, if I want to add a content, the contents can be difference, let's say difference between equations and expressions. So essentially, this is not a topic, but maybe it's something we want them to know about. But there's no topic that is difference between equations and expression. So instead of us to use a topic to denote it, we can simply use a content. all the fields are still applied as compared to topics. So it's just a simple content. The difference between content and topic is topics are added to topics, while content are just standalone. But we can use content to express our points. So I'll show you what it looks like. So we can as well add a header and say whatever the header is. And we can continue that way. So we can as well add a topic, a content at the level. So this is another content. So we can fill it up and type it as anything. So you can see how we've been able to create study material. So when the user comes in, what they see is they open the app, they see the list of resources, practice question, study. When they click practice question, they see the subjects under the practice question. They can go to study, they can go to practice questions. So however they like. So it's more like a study material, a full study material. Another resource I didn't talk about is the syllabus, or there's another resource we created called novels. So if we want to create novels, let me just quickly collapse it. We can add a new resource here. So we can right-click and add new resource and create a resource called, so we can choose the resource type. So there's question resource, which is for practice question, study resource, which is for study, reference resource. Reference resource can be things like syllabus, but this novels is actually study resource. So we can call it novels. So the moment we create a resource, it is going to be added, and we're not going to have the resource as an option. So we now have 3 resources: practice questions, study, and novels. In fact, let me simulate how we did prep mates content. There's another resource called novels and I think syllabus. So syllabus is a reference resource. So we choose a reference resource, syllabus. So we can add a description, it's optional. So we now have 4 resources. So if you open prep mates content, you see it, practice question, notes. So usually you can edit this resource. In prep mates content, we call it notes. So if you want to change the name to notes, you can call it notes. Yes, let's call it notes. So it has changed to notes. So the main resource we have for the library is the practice question, the notes, the novels, and the syllabus. So in the same way, we can populate the novels. So we can add novels because novels are not topics. So we can say the first book is The Lucky Headmaster. So this is where we can now describe the Lucky Headmaster novel. Okay. The second novel can be, say, Half of a Yellow Sun. It can be literature novel or whatever. Or Purple Hibiscus. Right? So we can put the description as well. So you can see how we can create different study materials or different notes or different novels or different practice questions to be used essentially for study, not more like for assessment purpose. But whenever they have their leisure, they can go and open it and study. So here brings me to an example we have done before. So I think there are no other properties we are here to talk. Though there's another thing I didn't talk about, custom properties. So with the software, you can also add a custom property. So if there's a property like author, for example, so the name of the property can be author, right? So because these are novels, you want to attach the author to it, right? You can choose the properties group. So there is no group, there's items classifier. So it's just a way to classify the novel, because in the UI, we can filter by author or whatever. So we can call it item classifier, and it's required. So for each novel, we may require an author field. So when we add a property, you can now see that the author field is now indicated, and it also affects the Lucky Headmaster. So we can put the name of the author here, whoever the author is. The author can be Ben, Ken, or whatever. And then for Purple Hibiscus, we can put the author here. She, whatever, right? So another difference between the study materials and the assessment is that the study materials offer you the ability to add custom properties for certain nodes. For example, the contents node, the topic node, I think the folder node as well. So we can save this for now. Now, I'm going to now open a typical example of, remember I told you we developed PrepMate. PrepMate is an app that is available on Android, iOS, as well as desktop for both Mac OS and Windows, that helps students sitting for exams such as UTME or WASCI or any other exam, NECO, BECE, to prepare for their exam. It's a paid application developed by the same team who developed the Venlearn software, by Veracon Technologies Limited. And the application is currently available and can be downloaded on Google Play Store. So we built 100% of PrepMate's content using the Venlearn Editor. So I'm going to show you an example of our UTME content. So if you refresh, you can see that we have a content called utme.veng project. So let me open it so I'll show you how it looks. So you see that this is the study material. So it has, these are all the subjects we have currently for UTME. So from English, you can see that it has 4 resources: practice questions, notes, literary text, and syllabus. That is exactly how it appeared on Venlearn content. In fact, this is Venlearn application currently running on my Mac. So you can see this is actually an iOS application, but you can make iOS run on Mac OS. So you can visit our website on the website is myprepmate.com in order for you to download the PrepMate app and see how it works. So it's available on all major platforms. So you can see now that English language, we have the practice question section. If we open the practice question, you can now see that we have a folder, because we are categorizing. This would have been more useful if it was WAEC, because WAEC has objective and theory. But if you now open the objective, you will see that under English language practice question objective, we have novel questions folder and all the years, 2004, 2005. If I open practice question here, you can see the 4 resources: practice questions, notes, literary text, and syllabus. For example, if I open practice question and I go to that English language, I select English language. There are different modes. We have CBT mode, study mode, mock mode, and game mode. If I click next, you will now see those. You see the objective folder. You see the objective folder, right? After the objective folder, we have the novel questions folder. So you see the novel questions folder, but I'll leave the folder. Then you see the years. You see that you see all the other years. So if I open this 2004, you see that it contains 100 questions, and I can start, and I'll start practicing the English language 100 questions. So I can select my answer, press next, select my answer, press next. You can see the number grid here as well. Okay, so if I go back, you'll see also the 100 questions. So you can see it. So everything you see on PrepMate app was developed with the Venlearn Editor. Okay, so that's for practice question. So the same applies to the other years. So I can collapse this. All the other years down to 2004, 2024, 2045 model questions were developed. Then under that, we also have novel questions. So you can see all the novel questions we have. We have the Lekki Headmaster, and we created chapter by chapter summary. Everything was done. This is a folder. So under chapter 1, Dusk, we have all the questions based on chapter 1 developed with Venlearn Editor. So let me collapse it. Now, the next thing you can see here is notes. So you can see that notes is just plain old topics. All these are topics under notes. We have comprehension. So you can see the full editor now. So everything under comprehension was described. We have comprehension, we have summary, we have essay writing, we have lexis, we have structure, we have oral forms. So if you open the editor and go back, you can quit this. And if you go to the home page, you can see, if you go to the notes, go to same English, you can see the topics here. If I click on comprehension, I'll see exactly how it is. So you can see here now that it also included the the subtopics or the subheadings. That's because we are using the advanced editor here. So oral forms will be taken as a heading. This will be taken as an under heading. So everything will be rendered for you in the application. So the same thing goes for literary text or novels. So there are some other novels that we summarized on the application. So you can see brief summary of the Lekki Headmaster. We talked about the settings, the themes, and also you can also see here now, like in chapter 1 now, Dusk. Chapter 1 is linked to a question group, which is under this practice question. So if we look at it, we can see the question group is linked to. So if it opens, if we go to English, go to practice question, those novel questions we have there, you see the linking. So you see it. So if you open you see that the chapter 1 has been linked to this Dusk. This is actually a question group that contains 100 questions. So what it means is that if we open the chapter 1 in the application, you get, there is going to be a practice question. If I go back to literary texts, and let's go back to literary text. So you can see that if you go to literary text, go to, I think, the English language, press OK. You go to the Lekki Headmaster. You can open chapter 1, which is the Dusk. You see how the chapter 1 is. There's going to be somewhere where you see a practice question. So not sure why it's not showing here, but usually, I don't know if I'm using the updated version of the application, but there should be a place where you see a practice question. And then when you click the practice question, you can now, okay, I think this is the chapter 1, yeah. When you click the practice question, you can now see the 100 questions we linked. So that's how it works. So that's that. Then we have the syllabus, another important part where we sort of provided the different syllabus contents. So also you can check the application and you can see the syllabus as well. So you see that all the things you see on this PrepMate app have been configured already on the Venlearn Editor, and that's how it appears. So however you present your content, automatically it will be rendered here. So that's the area of study materials. So you can open a syllabus and you can see the general objective, the recommended text, and you can see the other topics under. And if you look at it, you can see the syllabus contents. So that's how it works. So the same thing applies to the other question. So this is over a 300 MB file, contains thousands of questions, thousands of notes, so many things. Everything, if you can download the PrepMate app and check it, all the content on the PrepMate app was designed on this Venlearn Editor, using Venlearn Editor. So why do we need to design things like this? Also, if you are going to use the Venlearn software, you can design PrepMate-like application, and then it can be imported, and then students in your school, in your organization, can come and practice. So you can create an app like PrepMate if you have an access to the Venlearn software. So that's the essence of the library resource. So in order for you to use the library resource in the Venlearn software, all you need to do is to right-click and click Export as Library File. So it's going to export the content for you, and then it will ask you to save it in your file system. And then when you save it in your file system, you'll be able to import the contents in the Venlearn software, and then various clients can now have access to it. So thank you, and that's it about the study materials content.